Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and as requested and as promised, I am here today to finish off the rest of my Winter War card review. Now obviously these cards have been in the game for quite some time, so my review is going to be influenced by the fact that we have seen them in play, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how much they've seen play and how much I think they're going to see play, because a lot of these cards you might not have seen because they're not Jet Prototype or Swag. But I think they're still going to see play, so let's just roll the intro and jump straight into it.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alright, so the first card we're going to be looking at is the 13th Gebirgsjäger. It's a 3-cost 2/2 Alpine for Germany, standard rarity, and it gets +1/+1 whenever you add or deploy an Alpine unit. So Alpine gains its stats for every other Alpine unit on the board when you play it, and then this one is going to continue to gain stats as you play additional Alpine units. So basically, you can play this thing out as the first one and then not worry, because every additional Alpine will get the Alpine buff for this being on the board, and then this will get buffed for you playing an Alpine. That is really powerful effect. However, it is a 3-cost 2/2 infantry. And if you compare this to the 3-cost 4/3 Alpine, that's substantially better if you're playing it on 3 and you're trying to fight for the board. So you sort of have to be either playing this on turn 2 if you have like a turn 1 Gebirgs Pioneer, and then you play this on turn 2, and then you try to snowball it with really early, or you just need to have overwhelming board control, or you need to be very late in the game and you're like playing this out on like a turn, you're playing out a lot of Alpine units. And I mean, the first two situations I described, Alpine is winning without this card, and the third situation I described, Alpine is losing with this card most of the time anyways. So it's a powerful card, and like you're probably going to play it in an Alpine deck because just the Alpine theme is about trying to have as many Alpine units to play all the time always. So, like, you're still going to play this in the deck, but, like, it's not going to be breaking Alpine meta. It's not going to be breaking Alpine, and, like, there's a reason we have not seen an Alpine meta. A lot of people thought that we might see an Alpine meta with all these Alpine cards coming back and the new Alpine cards being revealed. But that has not happened yet because it's just a little bit too slow. So then we have a card that is not a little bit too slow. It's the Type 94 TK early. So Japan lost Bicycle Regiment with this rotation. I suppose I will have to talk about the rotations in a separate video. But this is just immediately comes in to replace it. It is a Japanese 1-cost, 0 operation cost, 1/1 tank with Blitz. It's special rarity, and whenever it gets +1 attack when it damages the enemy HQ. So this is when it damages, not attacks. So it attacks the HQ for 1 the first time you attack, and then it will go up to 2 attack. So it does not gain the attack before dealing the damage. It gains the attack after dealing the damage. Pretty crucial. And I mean, you just play this on turn 1 and hit face, and then you have... It's basically just like a cavalry regiment that hits face for 1 when you play it. With the downside that it does not have to attack if you're trying to trade it into a unit. So, it's just like a staple of every Jago deck. It's incredibly powerful. This fits into other things like Heinz. Like, any deck with Blitzkrieg is going to appreciate a 1-cost, 0 operation tank that you can just sort of chuck into the front line to give 4 attack. This is just an incredibly powerful card without being too oppressive. So, like, if you could think about, like, the other, like, best tier 1 1-drops in the game that have existed, you have, like, the Gebirgs Pioneer, which, if you just play it and go first and your opponent can't remove it, you probably win the game, like, 85-90% of the time. That's not fun. You have Red Devils if you go first and get it to the front line in any sort of, like, frontline aggressive mirror. You win the game, like, 85-90% of the time. That's not fun. Whereas Type 94 TK early, if you go first and your opponent doesn't have removal, you get, like, 3, maybe 6 damage face. And that's a lot. But... you don't immediately win the game. Like, its health does not change. It does not give you any additional resources on the battlefield. It's just a card that, if it goes unanswered, can deal a lot of damage, and it starts dealing damage fast. And what I really like about this is that dealing 1 damage on turn 1 is, like, basically nothing. So past that point, it's literally just a cavalry regiment that has done 1 additional damage, and that's not going to be a huge amount in the long term. And if it stays on board, its attack is obviously going to grow. So Type 94 TK early, absolutely love this card. I think it's really well designed, and it was a really intelligent way to give Aggro additional 1-drops without just sort of breaking the game. And this coming alongside Rotating Bicycle Regiment, I think that's a really, really smart decision, because one, you don't want to just throw this in while Bicycle Regiment still exists, because there is eventually just a critical mass of 1-drops that are going to make any deck that doesn't have a, like, Tora or supply shortage unplayable in the meta. And also just Bicycle Regiment was getting really tired in the meta. I think, like, having a 1-cost Fury unit is always going to limit design space in terms of attack buffs. So, you know, I really like this card. I need to not talk this much about every single card, because there's a lot of them, and I'm going to try to do all of them in one video, but honestly, this might have to be multiple videos. Next up, we have Enemy Contact. When this got announced, a lot of people were like, oh, this card's boring and terrible. Like, this card's terrible. Why would you play this when, you know, you can play Convoy for 1 credit more and draw an extra card? You can play Naval Power for 1 credit less to pin a unit, like a 2-cost pin a unit, draw a card. This card's terrible. Nah, this card's insane. Just any card that replaces itself is going to be good. It's 2-cost, which means you played it in Britain, which means it's actually 1-cost because Pioneer Regiment exists. And like 1-cost pin a unit, draw a card is insane. Like, I know Monty exists, so everyone thinks that like 1-cost pin like 5 units, draw a card. So like, why would pin 1 unit, draw a card be good? Pin 1 unit, draw a card is an incredible effect. Like, this fits into any combo deck. This fits into any Commandos deck. This is just a very, very powerful order that cycles you through your deck while slowing down the opponent, while stopping them from dealing damage if you're playing Commonwealth, or just, you know, if you're playing push OTK, whatever. This is just a very powerful card, and it has seen play. Like, I brought it to Worlds. This is just a very good card. And, like, it's not an auto-include in every Britain deck, which is a good thing. Like, you're not going to be playing this in ramp just because you care about the cards in your deck a lot more. Like, you want to have these big, heavy-hitting units, and you don't really want to just 2-cost cycle, essentially. But no, this is a very, very powerful card. I really like this. Then we have the 67th Baronovici, which, oh my goodness, the butchering of this card in the Worlds cast. I remember watching the Worlds cast. Every single time this card was mentioned, it was mispronounced in a different way. And Baronovici is not... There's a lot of hard and difficult cards to pronounce in this game. But no, Baronovici, for whatever reason. But what is the Baronovici? It's a 3-cost 2/3 Alpine for Soviets with the text, your light infantry units have Alpine. So when you play this, it doesn't immediately do anything, since Alpine is when you deploy or summon the unit, or deploy or add the unit, I should say. So when you play this with a board full of light infantry, it does absolutely nothing, because they're all already on the board. It does not have any deployment effect. It does not buff anything currently on the board. However, if you, say, have 5 light infantry on the board, and then you play Baronovici, and then you play a light infantry, that light infantry is now going to become a 7/7, because there is 5 light infantry, which all count as Alpine. There's the Baronovici, which is Alpine, and then that light infantry counts as Alpine as you deploy it, and gets +1/+1 for each other Alpine unit you control, which is 6. So, you know, it deploys as a 7/7. And, you know, deploying 1 7/7, not that great, but if you instead do something like No Surrender and summon 3 light infantry with Blitz, you're going to get a 7/7, an 8/8, and a 9/9, and then you trade out some of the guys in the front line and push those up to the front line, and then, you know, you could, like, deploy some more guys in the support line, and those are going to be, like, additional, like, 7/7, 8/8, 9/9s. This card just adds so much potential to Soviets, and importantly, it is within the Soviet main. So an issue with tokens is you could never play tokens outside of US Ally, because you have to rely on Unity as Strength and Alliance as like these big buff finishers for the tokens, as well as Industrial Might for the card draw. Now, Soviets are increasingly getting these mass token buffs that are in Soviets, and this is going to open up tokens to additional allies, which is going to open up the potential of tokens from becoming a tier 1 deck. And we've already seen tokens becoming like sort of like this low tier 1 deck. It performed really well in Worlds. It's been held back on ladder a bit by Jet. But the Baronovici is definitely a core card in that deck, because if this card comes out and you can't remove it immediately, like if it comes out on turn 3 and you can't remove it immediately, you're just going to start losing the game very, very, very fast. And, like, honestly, playing it on turn 3 is probably incorrect a lot of the time, because if you just, like, save this until, like, turn 7, turn 8, you can get there faster if you run War Machines. Just slam Baron of Ichi, no surrender, and just such a massive change in tempo. Plus, we will get to it, line of engagement. Baron of Ichi line of engagement on turn 5 is such a cheap combo that summons so many stats if you have like any amount of light infantry on the board. This card is just an absolute staple in tokens, and honestly, it might be a little bit too strong. I would not be that shocked if this card gets nerfed in the future, because it is kind of insane. And also, like, it feels weird that to push Alpine... Like, I'm happy that they're pushing Alpine outside of Germany, because Germany has been the only nation you can play Alpine with. And Soviets have a couple other Alpine cards, but this is not an Alpine card, this is a tokens card. Like, you're never going to play this in an Alpine deck, because a 3-cost 2/3 Alpine is terrible. Germany has a 3-cost 4/3 Alpine. And if you're playing a dedicated tokens deck, if you're playing a dedicated Alpine deck, you're not going to have the light infantry. So this card is basically useless in an Alpine deck. So this is literally just a tokens card, which makes the fact that they added an Alpine card, like, they're not adding an Alpine theme to Soviets, which is kind of lame, but, all around, interesting card, very powerful. Then we have Co-Belligerence, which is a British elite 7-cost order. Target enemy unit is shuffled into your deck. So, I saw a lot of people when this card was announced basically be like, oh, this card's, like, really ludicrously slow. Well, actually, I saw 2 reactions. I saw the reaction of, like, from a lot of, pro players and, like, top-end players being like, this is ludicrously slow. This is a terrible card that's never going to see any play. It's just far too greedy. And then I saw a reaction from a lot of people who are like, this card's absolutely insane, like Britain has never had any hard removal, and suddenly they get one of the best hard removal pieces in the game. This is going to break the game. It's going to be a staple of every single British deck. This card's overpowered. And I think that this card is firmly in the middle. I think people who think that this card is like the best thing ever now that it's been out for a while, I think they've been pretty decidedly proven wrong. This card, just 7 cost, remove a unit, is really, really expensive, and Britain already has stuff like Monsoon Rot supply shortage, which you would much rather be doing. Like, there's basically no decks in the meta that go to fatigue consistently right now, so the shuffling their big unit into your deck is basically meaningless. And one card is not going to be enough if you're playing like some sort of commandos combo, get through your deck really quickly kind of deck. One card from Co-Belligerence is not going to be enough to make up for the fact that you're hitting fatigue, and one threat from their deck to your deck is not going to be enough to make up for the fact that you're just comboing through your deck. Except the people who said that this card was terrible, because it's far too slow and greedy, I think are drastically underestimating the power level of this card, because there's a very, very similar, like, there's a card with basically the exact same text as this in Hearthstone, and it was one of my favorite cards in the game for a very long time. I just constantly played control decks built around that card. And it's just incredibly powerful that you play a deck that's really just heavily into removal. You don't run a ton of card draw. You don't run just enough card draw to make sure you always have removal. It's kind of a unitless type of package, except, you can run some units. And then you run cards like Co-Belligerence, where you just take their threat, put it into your deck, and also offset your fatigue by 1. And it's just such a powerful effect, and it's really, really good because it's not destroy and then shuffle into your deck, it is just remove and shuffle into your deck, which means it can get through destruction effects, which is really powerful against Soviets in particular. You could take a unit like 272nd, avoid giving them the Stalin, and then put it into your deck. And, Soviet control has traditionally been a bit of a difficult matchup for Britain control, just because Soviets have so much value, and a lot of their value comes in the form of these annoying destruction effects that survive through AoEs. So yeah, I think this is going to be a very powerful card that is going to see play in the future. It's been seen some play now, currently. But, it's not necessarily a staple, and I really like this card. I'm interested in this. I really like this design space of fatigue, intentioned control. So you can certainly expect me to be playing this card in the future, and I expect to see a decent number of people playing this card in the future as well. Then we get to supply priorities, which, honestly, I have to say has been seeing a lot more play than I was expecting. It is a 1-cost US order. Choose 1, deal 1 damage to all units, or fully repair all units. So this is a very interesting card. Both of these effects are symmetrical. So you can fully repair all of your opponent's units. I don't think I've ever seen anyone pick the repair option on this card, but it has potential if the repair synergy deck ever gets anything useful. because one cost repair all units in US is really good, because then you're less reliant on the Soviet Tamanskaya, which only affects ground units. And you might have stuff that triggers off of opponents' units being repaired as well, if there's ever symmetrical repair synergy. But honestly, everyone's playing this as the one cost, deal 1 damage to all units, because if you don't have any units, this is just one cost, deal 1 damage to all opponents' units, which is basically a Tora for 1. Obviously, it does not hit the opponent's HQ, and you might have units of your own, so it's not a one-to-one comparison, but this is very, very good for a couple things. One, you can just run this in US ramp, and now suddenly you don't just roll over and lose immediately if you're playing against Aggro, because you actually have a response to a lot of these 1-health Aggro units. And 2, you play this with Monsoon Rot, which lets you do a 7-credit Monsoon Rot supply priorities to wipe the board without needing to get to turn 9, which is actually a very, very important credit break, because you can do turn 2 War Machine, turn 3 Hour of Need, turn 4 Monsoon Rot supply priorities, destroy the entire board, and then suddenly you're going into 8 credits on an empty board, and while your opponent has 4 credits. And that's insane. So supply priorities is a very powerful effect, and it's a very powerful effect that is on its own not... It's not game-breaking, it's not meta-warping on its own, but it's just a very powerful tool for US ramp, which has traditionally been a bit of a terrible deck. So I'm happy that this card exists. I'm happy that this card has been seen more play than I expected. I expected this card to not quite do enough on its own, since with Lend-Lease gone, with Mobilization gone, the card draw in ramp has been much more restricted, so I thought you wouldn't want to run such a low-impact card on its own. However, people have found ways with stuff like Quartermasters to get around the card draw, and the game has been much more fast with other decks not running a lot of card draw on their own. So needing to go late, make your hand last a lot longer is not a necessary, as much of a necessary thing you need to build your deck around currently in the meta. So it's been outperforming my expectations, and I'm happy for that. Then we get to the 146th Infantry Regiment, also known as SPOOs. It's a 1-cost, 3/1 Soviet standard deployment. Get +1/+2 if you control 3 or more units, which I believe counts itself when you play it. So if you have 2 other units on the board, this deploys as a 1-cost 4/3. And as we were talking with Alpine, 4/3's pretty good stat line. However, this requires running a 1-cost 3/1 in your deck, because sometimes you're not going to have 2 other units on the board, and even if you do always have 2 other units in the board, there's basically no aggro deck in the game right now that would want to run a high-stat unit, a high-stat infantry that does not have Blitz over just a lower-statted infantry that does have Blitz. Also, it's a Soviet card, which makes it highly restricted, so, this is just a bit of a pack filler. There's potential for this card in the future if the meta switches to just kind of get stats on the board. Because if there's ever a point where it's too difficult to remove these units, or if Soviet, either as an ally or a main nation, gets some interesting aggro options, there's potential for this card, but currently this is a bit of a pack filler. So then we get to a very interesting card. It is a Finnish card, the Infantry Regiment 61. It is a 4-cost 4/6 infantry, so very good stat line. 4-cost 5/6 is sort of like the vanilla stat line, think of the Lancashire Fusiliers. And this card has salvage, which I think I've spoken about it before, but we certainly have seen it. Salvage is not as powerful a keyword as I think a lot of people thought, and certainly not as powerful of a keyword as the devs thought, because a lot of cards with the salvage keyword on them are drastically overcosted or understated. However, this card is very different, because it's not just a 4-cost 4/6 salvage, it's a 4-cost 4/6 salvage with a passive, all of your salvage units deploy as 4/4s instead of 1/1s. Now, this is not a huge deal if you're playing against a control deck or a mid-range deck, and you get a 4-cost unit that doesn't do much for you, like you get a Sherman, and you're not going to be drawing off the Sherman. So now, instead of a 4-cost 1/1, or a 3-cost 1/1, it's going to be a 3-cost 4/4. So, it just gives something to Alpine. However, this is absolutely insane against aggro, because if you hit a Greyhound or a Red Devils or a Cavalry Regiment, you're going to be playing a 1-cost 4/4 with Blitz, which is really, really good. Also, it means that it had low health on the opponent's turn, which means you can trade into a lot of these over several turns, or if you have several salvage units on the board, all of the salvage units in your hand are going to be deploying as really, really big dudes. So this is a very interesting card where it's sort of like an anti-aggro salvage card that is going to be really realistically the core of the salvage decks, because it is one of 2 payoffs for having salvage. And the other being scrap metal, we'll get to it. And this is the payoff that is actually interesting, because if you can get enough salvaged units quickly, you can try to overwhelm the board. However, this sort of mid-range deck, its weakness is going to be control. Or like the deck it's supposed to be better into is going to be control. And control is just not going to have a lot of units you can salvage quickly enough to pop off with this, and also are going to have the removal options to remove this before you like attack with it itself. So it makes it much worse into control. But you know, it's a very powerful card. It's sort of the core of the salvage package. I don't think the salvage package is that good right now, but in the future there's a possibility. Then we get to a laughably bad card. It's a 2-cost Finnish artillery. It's 1/2 stats, no keywords. When this unit attacks, it deals 1 damage to a random enemy. So it's better than Long Tom because it costs 2 instead of costing 5, but you know, being better than Long Tom is something you can say about almost every single card in this game, and that's basically all you can say about this card. It's absolutely terrible. Probably one of the worst cards that they released in this entire expansion, and they gave it to Finland, which is really, really bizarre, because almost all of other Finland's cards are really, really powerful, because, you know, it's a brand new ally class, you want to give them really powerful cards. This is just bad. Like, it's not... It fits into an archetype that doesn't get support at the moment. This card is just absolutely terrible. Moving on, we have a card that is not absolutely terrible. It is the 20th Panzer Grenadier. And obviously, I'm going to be very, very influenced by the fact that this card is probably the single best and... Well, maybe not best, but it is easily the single most played card of the expansion. I'm going to be slightly influenced by that, but I mean, look at how many copies of this card that I brought to Worlds. I think it's fair to say that I saw the potential of this card before it was released. And I'm not trying to say like, oh, I saw this card before anyone else did. A lot, like everybody brought this card to Worlds. Everybody saw that this card was insane. I'm just trying to say it was very clear that this card was insane before it was played in the game. Because it is a 4-cost, 3/4 infantry with blitz, 1 operation cost. Now that's not great. A 3/4 infantry with blitz is costed kind of at 3, so you're paying 1 extra credit for a deployment effect, add a 35T and combined arms to your hand. So you're paying 1 extra credit for a convoy that draws you 2 very, very powerful cards that have immediate synergy with your board situation. That is insane. If you play this on turn 4, you can just play this on turn 4, and then you have a 35T and combined arms in your hand going into the next turn, and your opponent has to be terrified of that. You can play this on turn 5 and attack immediately with this infantry, or push it to the front line to threaten 7 damage on the following turn. Or, if you draw this card later in the game, you can play this on turn 8, you play Panzer Grenadier, you push it to the front line, you play 35T, which gets its cost reduction because this is an infantry, and then you play combined arms for a minimum of +2/+2, and then you can attack with the 0 operation cost 35T. This card is just absolutely insane. Like, this card is, like, laughably insane. And the fact that this card was not nerfed in the most recent balance patch is kind of insane to me. This card will definitely be nerfed in March. Like, I can promise you, I would put money on the fact that this card will be nerfed in the March balance patch. It's absolutely insane. Then we have Hammer Home, which is a very interesting Polish card. It's a 4-cost Polish order. Duplicate a friendly exile unit, then give both +2/+2 and -1 operation cost. It's a special effect. So this is very, very interesting. And very, very potentially powerful, because if you have an exile unit with blitz, such as the Yak 9 PL, I believe, which is the 3/5 exile Polish fighter with blitz, which has seen play by me in Soviet control, and I think only by me, but, you know, other people will catch on eventually, I promise. Now, if you have that card on board, or you can play both of them together as, like, a... What is that, like a 10-cost combo? You can play Hammer Home on that. You make it a 5/7. Well, so you get 2 5/7s with Blitz. And then they both get their operation cost reduced from 2 to 1. So you have 2 5/7s that can attack with 1 operation cost. And then, you know, you can throw on some Burst of Fires or something in there. So this is, like, gonna be a very, very powerful combo piece. but also it's just a very powerful mid-range tool in an exile deck in general, because even if you're not using it to do like crazy burst combos, you can just use it to generate a lot of stats really quickly. So for example, if you just have the 5/6 exile fighter on board, you can just make it into a 7/8 and then summon a second 7/8. Like, just 4 cost to get a 7/8 fighter is just a good... It's just good. A 7/8 fighter is really good. And if you can just play this on curve, you can do this really powerful things with it. There's also the T-34 you can do this with. And then you can combine that with other operation cost reductions with the Soviet card, T-34 synergy. It's just a really good card that it fits perfectly into a deck that does not exist at the moment. So I would be shocked if we don't see Hammer Home in the future. Well, sorry. That is not true. I would not be shocked if we don't see Hammer Home played in the future. I would be shocked if we don't see Hammer Home played in the future if Polish Exile ever gets to tier 2. However, Hammer Home is not going to be enough on its own to get to Polish Exile to tier 2. So we will have to see for more cards in the future, but in the meantime, this is a very interesting card, and if you pack it, you can play some tier 3 fun decks in casual or against your friends, and have a lot of fun with this card, I think. Then we get to Victory March, which is a 5-cost US Elite order. Set the operation cost of all of your units to 0. Gain HQ defense equal to the total cost reduced. So this is a very, very interesting card. It is one of the very few US main healing options, and this is a very powerful healing option, because the existing healing options are We Can Do It and Gunship, or Gunboat Raid, not Gunboat Raid, Gunship Mission. And that heals 3 and 2 respectively. There was heal 6 on Research, but that's been rotated. Victory March, you can heal a lot off of this. If you have, like, say, just 4 units in the support line, all of which have 3 operation cost, that's just healing 12. 5 cost, heal 12, gain 12 credits in immediate effect, assuming you can move or attack with those units. You can also combine this with stuff like Snowstorm, which we will get to in soon, which is a 1-cost, set the operation cost of all of your units to 4. So you can combine that with Victory March, which is just heal 4 for all units you have on the board, plus give a asymmetrical negative effect to your opponent for 1 credit, and then operate with your stuff for free. So this is a very powerful card. However, it's a little awkward. Like, it's a card that's, you can see it being really good, but also, if you're just, like, playing ramp and you've ramped a bunch, but you can't keep units on the board because your opponent just has overwhelming board control, this is a card that does absolutely nothing, right? Like, what are you going to do? Like, your board's empty. You're going to, what, play, like, a Grenadier Guards Victory March for 5 cost, heal 1? This card requires you to at least be competitive on the board to be useful. What's interesting is we've been thinking about this so far in Control and Ramp. You can also just play this in mid-range, because mid-range has a decent number of 2 operation cost units, and just using this exclusively as a 5 cost permanently would set the operation cost of all of your units to 0. That's not necessarily terrible. Like, things we've seen Pursuit run. Obviously, Pursuit has the Retreat, which is a big part of why it's run, but that's a temporary 1 operation cost reduction. We've seen some very limited play of Victory March, which I believe was a 1-turn set to 0 operation cost, and obviously had a different effect. So I think there's potential of this being played in a bit of a slower mid-range list in the future. So this is just a card with a lot of potential, but again, does not immediately fit into any decks. Then we have Duress, which is a card that has seen a lot of play since its release. It's a 0 cost, just suppress target unit. And again, suppress is set its reduce its stats to its base starting stats, remove any keywords and passive effects on this card, just completely reset the card to a vanilla unit with its starting stats, essentially. Now, this card has seen a lot of play, particularly in the German-US Jet deck, because turns out just 0 operation cost suppress, 0 cost suppress is just a very, very, very powerful effect in a wide range of situations, and costing 0 just means you can throw it out whatever, whether you're using it to get rid of a guard to go face, you're using it to set the operation cost of a 5th Rangers to 4, to completely throw off your opponent's curve, if it's to, like, remove the effect from a Sexton, or Honey, remove Smokescreen from an important unit you want to remove, like Signal Regiment. Whatever it is, just 0 cost suppress a unit. Very, very powerful effect, and I can honestly say I did not expect it to be this good. I expected suppress to be a ludicrously powerful keyword, I just did not think Duress would be the one you want to play it with, because I didn't think people would want to run such a low impact card. That's the one thing that has shocked me the most about this expansion, is people really just cutting a lot of card draw and going full YOLO, essentially, in a lot of decks, where it's just, if I run out of cards, I've run out of cards, but I'm hoping I'm going to win before then. So in that type of deck, Duress is very, very powerful. And honestly, I think Duress is just going to see a lot of play in the future as well. I think I was slightly underestimating the effect of Suppress. Zero cost Suppress, just a very, very powerful card. And this is a very interesting card being in US, because if this was like say a Japanese card, or if this was a British card, oh my lord, we would never see the end of this card being played. But it's a US card, which is very interesting, because US is typically played for its units, not its cheap effects. Like, you rarely play US for its orders. You play US realistically for its units most of the time. So this is a very, very interesting change to that. So it's going to potentially lead to different combinations. Like, this is going to be a really good card in Aggro, because Aggro has the card draw to run zero cost Duress. So it makes Japan US, US Japan more of a possibility. This is going to lead to some interesting ally combinations, I think. So this is something I'm happy with. Then we have a card that honestly I forgot existed. The Oxen Bucks. It's a 5-cost British infantry, 3/4 stats, deployment to deal 2 damage to an enemy unit, and it has salvage. This card is not that good. If salvage was really, really powerful and it had a win condition, you would play this in a salvage deck probably, because there's not a lot of high-end salvage cards, and this does have an immediate effect, and a 3/4 salvage is not nothing. However, there is no real win condition to salvage, and it's certainly, at the moment, statted as much more of a high-speed tempo deck, and this just does not make the cut. I think this card is not that good. But I'm not going to say it's terrible. It's just not that good. Then we have the 3/3/4 Mountain Rifles. It is a 2-cost 2/3 Alpine in Soviets. And again, I can't believe they added this card to the game, because there is Baronovici, which costs 1 more and is absolutely broken. This costs 1 less and has 0 synergy with any card in the game, because the only 2 other Alpine units in Soviets have no synergy with other Alpine cards and exclusively have synergy with non-Alpine decks. So, this card is just kind of unplayable trash. Then we have on the Ascent a very interesting Japanese card. It's a 3-cost order, destroy and salvage the units with the least attack on the battlefield. So all units with the least attack on the battlefield are immediately destroyed and salvaged for 3 cost. So this card could potentially destroy 9 of your opponent's units if they all have the same attack and you don't have anything with lower attack. This could theoretically be a 3-cost destroy the entire board, salvage 9 cards to your hand. Now, obviously, that's never going to happen. There's some specific matchups where this is very powerful. For example, tokens, because tokens, 1, they just have 1 attack dudes to begin with, but even if they start buffing them, the buffs are almost entirely symmetrical. So all of them will remain at the same attack, so this is going to be very easy to get on the Ascent to be 3-cost, destroy all of the light infantry. However, the salvage effect honestly can become a bit of a downside in situations like that, because then your hand gets filled with light infantry, and you probably don't want light infantry. But the other interesting thing about On the Ascent is, 1, if the board's empty, this is just 3-cost, destroy and salvage your opponent's unit. So it's a bit of like a DFA, Death from Above, in that sort of situation. Like, if your opponent, the board's empty, you play it to the last man, destroy everything, and then your opponent just like slams a Joseph Stalin on the board. You can just On the Ascent to destroy and salvage that Joseph Stalin. But what's also interesting about this is, yes, it's a very good control card, because it's just kind of removal, but you can also run this in Aggro, where like you just trade off the entire board and then On the Ascent to get through their guards, or like remove their guards. You can just it's a very powerful card if you're behind. It can give you stuff to refill your hand. I think that this card is going to see a lot more play in the future as people sort of figure out the proper ways to play it, the proper ways to build your deck around it, the proper ways to play your deck around it. So this is a very, very interesting card, and this is a bit of a Giga Brain card. Like, there's some very, very interesting and difficult to spot lines you can do with this card, and I really like that. The one criticism I have of this card is the fact that it says it's called On the Ascent, and it is a symmetrical effect that can easily and frequently destroy your own units. So you can play on the ascent to destroy all of your own units, which is weird. But yeah, that's just a bit of a nitpick that I have with this card. Then we go on to the first French card we've seen, Honor and Loyalty, a 2-cost French order. Shuffle target unit into owner's deck. The owner then draws 2 cards. So this is interesting. This is shuffle it into their deck, unlike other cards like a Grounded or Fog of War, which puts it on the top of their deck. And this can target either player. So you can, for example, just summon like a crappy token, like a 1/1 guy that you don't care about. You shuffle it into your deck, and it's just 2 cost, draw 2 cards. So it's a little bit like Deadly Duty. Now, obviously, it's kind of a lot worse than Deadly Duty in that situation, because you don't want to ever draw the crappy 1/1 guy who you put into your deck, and you're spending an extra credit to do that. So most of the time, you're going to be wanting to play this on the opponent's units, but it is interesting the fact that you are able to use it on yourself to just, like, sort of cycle through your deck if you need a specific card to avoid losing. And playing it on your opponent's stuff, I think the intention is sort of like either a 2-cost shuffle a unit into the opponent's deck as just like a panic button, just like sort of like they slammed a really big guy you can't deal with. 2 cost, it's gone. Now, they have drawn 2 extra cards to make up for the fact that you just played 2 cost to remove a unit without triggering its destruction effect. And those 2 draws might draw them back into the card that you just removed, and they'll replay it. But, you know, it's an interesting panic button. And what's also interesting is if you are playing a bit of a mill deck, and their hand is full, and then you play this, it is 2 cost, shuffle a unit into their deck, remove the top 2 cards of their deck, and then you end the turn and they remove the 3rd card of their deck. So you can just play this in a mill strategy. I think this is a very interesting card that a lot of people are probably going to forget is in the game. But I would not be surprised if this card comes back in some sort of unitless package as like a tier 2, low tier 1 deck in the far future, or just like as a tier 3 mill France in a fun sort of combo deck where you try to destroy your opponent's entire deck. So this is just an interesting card to have in the game. Then we have the Premier Hussard, the 3-cost 3/4 Blitz infantry for France. At the end of your turn, draw a card if the enemy has no units on the battlefield. So as I mentioned, 3-cost 3/4 Blitz infantry is sort of the standard stat line. And this is draw a card at the end of your turn if the opponent has no units. The problem is, in a game like Cards, people play units. It's very, very difficult to have your opponent have no units on the board, especially if you are an aggro or mid-range deck. And it's just a weird card. Like, why would you play France to run this when you can instead play Germany and just play like 20-second infantry? It's a bit of a bizarre card. I don't see there being remotely enough to support this sort of French mid-range deck, but again, we've seen people try out US-France mid-range in the past, so maybe we'll see it again. Then we have a Finnish card, a 1-cost pin target unit, add a CC to your support line. So what is a CC, you might ask? This 1-cost 1/1 infantry units dealt damage by this unit are destroyed. So how good is pin a unit, add a CC to your support line? Well, this CC does not have Blitz, and your opponent is probably going to be able to remove it before it, removes your opponent's best thing. However, 1-cost pin target unit's not a bad card if you can support the draw. If you have the draw to support it, and I mean, we've seen Naval Power run a lot, and that is 1-cost pin a unit, heal 3. Is adding a CC better or worse than heal 3? I would say probably slightly better on average. However, you're not playing it in an average deck. You're playing it in a deck that is specifically built around drawing off of British orders with Crusader, and this is not a British order, and it's specifically built around Commonwealths, and this does not help support your Commonwealth deck. So this is just not that great of a card, but it's not that terrible of a card either. We then have Cold Trap as a 2-cost countermeasure for Finland. When an enemy unit attacks, so this is not anything specific, this can attack a unit, this can attack your HQ, this can attack anything, it adds a CC as a defender. So this is kind of like a 2-cost destroy an enemy, the first enemy unit that attacks, which is a very, very powerful effect. However, it is not exactly that, because your opponent can attack with something with heavy armor first, and then the CC won't damage it, or they can attack with a bomber or an artillery first, and then the CC unit won't damage it. So In general, I think this is better than air defense on average. And air defense is a card that has seen a decent amount of play. So I think Coil Trap as like a one-of in Finnish decks, especially on ladder in a closed deck or in an open deck tournament, it's going to be a lot harder to use. But I think this is all around a good card. It's not busted. It's not bad. This is a good card that you can easily run in a deck. Then we have the 252nd Rifles. This is a 3-cost 2/6 Soviet infantry that gains +1 attack when your HQ takes damage and becomes veteran when its attack becomes 6 or above. So this is interesting. So your HQ needs to take damage 4 times. Now, if you've ever played self-damage, it's pretty difficult for you to damage your HQ 4 times. However, this is not just when you damage it. This is just any time your HQ takes damage. So if your opponent has a signal regiment on board, you're going to reach the veteran on this really, really fast. Because if you've ever had 272nd, or not the 272nd, the 456th on the board, the 1/3 that gains Guardian +1/+1 whenever you take damage, that gains stats really, really quickly. And so does this. Now, what is the veteran form? The veteran, it becomes a 6/6. So once it reaches 6 attack, it just becomes a permanent 6/6. It stops growing. And it loses the gain +1 attack text, and instead gains the text, cannot be pinned or suppressed, takes 1 less combat damage from ground units. So essentially, it becomes an absolute beast. Now, the downside of this card is it's still completely vulnerable to orders. So, if you get this veteraned out, your opponent's just going to play Hammer, they're going to play Lion for a day, they're just going to play Monsoon Rot, Supply Shortage, they're going to do any number of things. It's an infantry, it doesn't have Blitz, it's a little bit slow, it doesn't have Guard like 452nd. It doesn't damage you to synergize with your other self-damage cards, and this is very clearly intended to be a self-damage card. So it doesn't have that, like the SU, that damages yourself when you play it. And you can't, cheat this out for free, like the 34th Guards. All of that being said, I think this is still a very good card in self-damage, maybe not as a 3 copies, but 2 copies, maybe even just 1 copy. It's a very powerful threat. If you get it down early, you can trade into units, and then you buff its attack up to veteran, and it heals back up to a 6/6, and then gains this additional effect of taking less combat damage. So if you're playing against a deck like Frontline, a deck like Aggro, they have to be pretty terrified of this card. They can't just continue going face, because very quickly it will become an absolute beast. Against control, I think this card is a lot less powerful, but self-damage against control is all about just getting as much stats on the board as quickly as possible. So if you play out 252nd and they remove it, that's 1 less piece of removal they have for your 34th Guards. So, I think it's just an all-around really good self-damage card, and I think self-damage is going to see more play now that Jet has been nerfed, because self-damage is going to be very good into decks like Aggro and Tokens, which are sort of set up to be the replacement on ladder for a Jet being nerfed off the #1 spot. So I think self-damage is going to see a bit of a resurgence on ladder, and I think you're going to be seeing 252nd Rifles in that deck. Then we have a 1-cost 1/4 infantry, no text on Germany. I would just move on immediately from this card, but I think it is worth noting that just having really high health units for cheap 1-cost cards always have potential to see play. That this is far better than the 1/2 0 operation cost infantry. That card's a bit terrible. Because if you can either get a very cheap set attack equal to defense effect, not like an order, I'm not saying naval support, but if you get a unit, for example, like Oxford, if you can get a more consistent Oxford effect, just slamming a 1-cost 4/4 would be really good. Or you can play this in a defensive deck if you have a way to give this additional health and guard, and it's a very fast meta. So, for example, the supply drop, the +4 health and guard, if you just make this into a 1/8 guard on turn 2, there is certain metas where that is going to be useful. So I'm not going to just immediately write this card off as absolute garbage, but currently it is absolute garbage pack filler. But cards, specifically with this cost and stat line, always have a slim margin of potential. So do not just completely write this card off. But it's terrible. Then we have the 78th Steel Regiment. I revealed this card on my channel, so if you want to see a much more in-depth thoughts on this card, you can go back and watch that video. Now that the expansion has dropped, I have not seen this card once. I have not had the urge to play this card once. I don't think it's it's still a very powerful effect. However, it's just nobody's really been in the front line much. You've just been getting crushed by jets from the support line. This card doesn't have guard. This card does not heal you. This card does not have blitz. This card is not good in the current meta. However, we're entering a new meta. So, you know, again, I think this card always has a bit of potential, just because it's such a powerful effect. Like, just 2 units in the front line. You play a 3-cost 6/6 with Fury. That's just good. And having 2 units in the front line is something that most decks will consistently do relatively early in the game. So again, I'm not saying, like, it's a Polish card, and you can't run something like Mare Nostrum on it. But, you know, just a card with this much potential is going to see play at some point, so do not write this card off. Another card I revealed, Ingenuity. Choose one of 3 British or US bombers to add to your hand. I've seen a lot of people play this card on ladder. I don't think this card is that good. I think this is just a massive, massive bait card to just try to pack in more value and greed into your deck. I don't think you should run this card in your deck. Now, obviously, if you have a very small collection, this is a bit of a fun card because you get to play out with cards that you might not otherwise own, and whatnot. But in a competitive deck, if you have a full collection, do not run this card. It is absolutely terrible. If you're putting this card in your deck, you are going to be dropping your win rate against aggro a substantial amount. This card, absolute bait. Alright, so the third card I revealed, the elite I revealed, is Alpine. 7 cost, set your HQ's defense to 25, remove the top 10 cards of your deck. I have not seen this card played once since the expansion has been dropped, which... Alright, so the next card, or the last card that I revealed was Alpine. 7 cost, German Elite Order, set your HQ's defense to 25, remove the top 10 cards of your deck. Shockingly, I've not seen this card played once on ladder, and that's just because everyone who's playing Drone is playing Jet. But again, I still think that this card has a decent amount of potential. Just immediate set your health to 25 is really, really good. And it's like the only piece of German healing they have. And Germany is a nation that can somewhat reasonably get through their deck to find a single card relatively quickly in the game if they want to. So this is going to be a very powerful card of German control. Potentially German combo. The remove 10 cards from your deck makes it much harder to run it in a combo deck, but there's worlds where you can order your deck, draw the key pieces, or just run enough copies of the key pieces that you're willing to take this risk. So again, I think it's a card that has potential. It's going to see play at some point, but it's not just like an immediate meta changing, slap it in every deck kind of card. And I think that's fine. So it's a little disappointing I haven't seen more from this card, but I still expect to see this card in the future, and I will certainly be trying out this card in the future as well. Oh, here we go. Then we have Entrenched, a 2-cost British Order. Give a friendly guard unit +3 attack, fury, and salvage. Now, I have no idea why salvage was not bolded on this. I don't know if they've patched that yet. But +3 attack, fury, and salvage on a guard for 2 cost. This is a very, very powerful effect. So, for example, there's a lot of cards you want to play this on, and most British guards, most just guards in general, have really high health and lower attack. So the fact that you're giving it +3 attack, fury, and salvage is really, really big. So, for example, if you just have a Glamour Boys on the board. Glamour Boy is the most popular guard in the game right now. It is a 3/7 guard. You play Entrenched on it, it becomes a 6/7 guard, can attack 2 units, and you salvage both of those units. So that's really, really powerful. Now, the downside is you're running a card that does not have any immediate effect unless you start your turn with a unit on the board, and it is a type of unit that your opponent is going to be wanting to remove. And again, salvage is best against aggro decks, and aggro decks are not going to want to let you keep a guard on your board. So it's a little hard to use. I've seen some people try this out, and I've seen some people try this out to a decent amount of success, but it doesn't really fit into a deck super well. Like, if you're playing ramp, you would rather just, you know, play some more board clears, some more ramps, some more big threats, more guards, than play Entrenched. And if you're playing, like, any sort of Commandos, Crusader combo deck, that's going to play off of this being a British Order, play off, like, reducing this, etc., they're not going to be running a lot of guard units, so it's going to be difficult for them to stick a guard to play Entrenched. So yeah, it's a very, very difficult card to run, despite it being a very, very powerful effect, but I would not be that surprised if people find out a way to make this card insane in the future, even potentially some sort of OTK, because 2 cost, give a unit 3 attack and fury is insane. So just throwing this out there immediately, I've literally just thought of this on the spot. But if you do something like Type 94, or like any blitz tank, so let's say like Panzer A, the 1-3 blitz tank. Then you play supply drop on it to make it a 1-7 tank with guard and blitz still. Then you play naval support on it to make it a 7-7 guard with blitz. Then you play entrenched on it to make it a 10-7 blitz tank with fury. And then you go up and attack with it twice. That's 20 damage. That's literally just an OTK. So yeah, the 2 cost, give a unit plus 3 attack and fury is going to have combo potential at all points. There is no point where it's never not going to have combo potential. Now, how good is that combo is a very different question, because right now, why would you play that when you can instead play push? But yeah, the potential of a card that says 2 cost, give plus 3 attack and fury is insane. Then we have Special Reinforcements, a 2 cost Soviet Order standard. Add a copy of your last destroyed unit to your hand. So there's some weird things you can do with this. You can try to use this as a combo piece to just generate a lot of copies of a specific type of card. You can use this as just a value generator in a control deck. So for example, you play 272nd Red Banner Special Reinforcements to add a second 272nd back to your hand. However, do Soviets really need value generation? The answer to that is no. I'll just tell you that that much right off the bat. This is another, it's just a bit like Ingenuity. It's a bait card for people who want to be really, really greedy and run a lot of just value generation in their control decks rather than running cards that are going to make them win more games. That being said, there's a lot of potential for this card in as sort of combo decks. Or even just like, you could potentially run this, because it's not the last unit that was destroyed this turn. So you can run this in like defensive decks, like control decks, where you just like play down really powerful guards, really powerful healing units. Your opponent removes them, and then you just do special reinforcements as essentially 2 cost to draw one of your anti-aggro cards. So just the effect is really interesting and really, really powerful with a lot of potential. People just need to figure out the correct way to use this. And the correct way to use this is not just generate 272nds. Because that's not going to help you in the vast majority of games. Then we have the Glamour Boys. This is a controversial card. When it was announced, I think a lot of people were just kind of like, about it. It's just, oh, it's another standard British guard. Britain has a lot of standard guards, for example, the Churchill. The 5 cost, 2/7 heavy armor guard. That card has seen 0 competitive play. This is 1 more attack, 1 less operation cost, loses heavy armor, which goes from tank to infantry. The difference is deployment gain 4 health. Now, how good is good deployment gain 4 health? There's the Blue Regiment, which is 3 cost, 3/4 infantry, deployment gain 2 health, and that has not seen any play since the first expansion. Now, just a 5 cost, 3/7 guard, deployment gain 4 health is very, very powerful. It turns out it is a powerful combination of effects and anti-aggro cards that, like, even if your opponent retreats it, you just replay it and you gain an additional 4 health. Even if your opponent has removed it, you have still gone through a piece of removal and gained health, and now you still have 3 more of them in the deck. This is a good card in ramp. This is a good card in combo, because it's just a powerful, like, wall of a unit that heals you, gets you closer to Commonwealth. It gives you more health to go off with the push combo. It slows down your opponent from damaging you. It's just a very, very powerful unit that really fits in right into the groove of a lot of British decks, especially after losing Seaforth in the first rotation. Now, I think this card is also worse than a lot of people think it is. Like, it's a very good card, and if you run it in your deck, that's perfectly reasonable. Like, I'm not saying it's a wrong card to run. I'm not saying it's bad to run. It's obviously a very powerful card, and it has a very good reason to be being run in people's decks. I just think that this is not like an auto-include in every single British control deck as a 4 of, every single British combo deck as a 4 of. In ramp, it's really good because it's healing. It's a bigger statted guard than, say, something like Blackwatch. It's something you can ramp into. So in ramp, I think this is a really good card if you're playing ramp, but like just a general control deck, like if you're playing something like Finnish ally, Italian ally, like a discard package, I don't think this is just an automatic 4 of include in every single British control deck, which a lot of people seem to think it is. I've seen some people calling for this card to be nerfed, and like maybe in the future, if they just didn't want this standard card, if they intended this to be more of a low rank pack filler type of card, not like a impact in the tier 1 meta type of card, maybe it will be nerfed in the future, but honestly, I don't think it needs to be nerfed in terms of power level compared to other cards in the game. There's a lot of ways to get around this with aggro decks. There's a lot of ways to get around this with mid-range decks. And there's a lot of other options that you could consider rather than playing Glamour Boys, so it's not like this is like sort of strangling out the guard options. So yeah, that's my thought on Glamour Boys. Very powerful card, more powerful, and seen more play than I think anybody really expected. But I think a lot of people are a bit overvaluating this card a little bit based on just how much play it has seen, because how much play a card sees, it does not equal how good that card is. Also, specifically, it was really good in the Jet meta, because the most popular Jet deck was German-Soviet, which had no way of removing guards, and being a 3/7 means that they have to hit 6 even units to trade Jet into it, and you're healing, and then you know, it was just a really good card, like, in that brief moment where it came out, and it's still a good card, but anyways, we're moving on. Now we have the Infantry Regiment 11, a 3-cost, 3/4 Finnish infantry. It does not have Blitz, it rather instead has Salvage. So this is just not that good of a card, but it's not that terrible of a card. Like, you're probably going to have 12 better Finnish cards to run. However, like, you know, if you pick this up in draft, if you're just doing salvage fun thing shenanigans with a small collection, this is a perfectly reasonable card to run. But yeah, it's a bit of a pack filler nonsense card. This is kind of what I talked about when I said that I think they overvalue how powerful salvage is. Then we have the one other payoff card of salvage, and a card that haunts my dreams every night, because scrap metal, 0-cost Finnish card. Choose and discard a unit to draw a card, so not that great of an effect. With then the additional effect, gain 4 credits if this unit was salvaged. So if we don't look at the salvage part of this, 0 credits, gain 4 credits, draw a card is insane. Just gain 4 credits, draw a card for 0, and it's a standard, is absolutely insane. War Production is breaking the game right now as 0 credits, gain 2 credits, and you have to build your entire deck around it, and also sometimes it discards you cards. Now, obviously this does discard you cards, but you're going to be discarding cards that you added to your hand rather than cards you naturally drew. So if you can have salvaged units in your hand, this card is absolutely insane. This is like the most broken card in the game if you have salvaged units. Now, the one problem with this card is that you have to have salvaged units, and it's kind of not easy to gain salvaged units in a deck where you are going to be able to greatly utilize 0 credits, gain 4 credits. Like, it's really difficult to build like a tempo deck that also gains salvage units, because a lot of the salvage cards are either more expensive or like hugely anti-tempo. And then there's also, you have to have it a deck with a decent enough amount of card draw where you're like, the best ways to get salvaged units, like, because you want to gain salvaged units early. So you want to be running like a lot of stuff like the Mixed Regiment, and I forget the other one, but Japan has 2 1-cost salvage cards, but then you're running 4 copies of scrap metal, and then you're running like 8 copies of 1-cost gain salvage unit cards. But so then you also have to be running cards that you want to play with your 4 additional credits you gain. So it's just like a bit of a puzzle right now to figure out how exactly the scrap metal deck is going to look like. But I can promise you that scrap metal is going to be into a tier 1 deck at some point in this game. Like, this card is so ludicrously powerful. I think this is easily the most single powerful effect card that has ever been released in this game, period. We just need to find a way to make it work. And maybe there is not a way to make it work right now, but this is a card that is going to exist in the game for several years to come. And every expansion is going to bring new ways to get salvaged units. Every expansion is going to bring new cards to play quickly with this. There's going to be new ways to find this. There's going to be new ways to find salvaged units. This card only gets better with time. This card will be a tier 1, probably tier 0 deck at some point. And I would not be surprised if Scrap metal was nerfed at some point. Speaking of absolutely broken cards, we have Depths of Winter, the 5-cost Soviet elite. Remove all units from the battlefield, replace them with light infantry. So you might immediately see the word light infantry and be like, oh, it's a tokens card. And, you know, you can play this in tokens. It's a really good card in tokens. But no, this is just an absolutely insane control card because it is remove all units. So it gets around destruction effects. Like if your opponent has 272nd and like 3 Type 90 or 3 T60s on the board, and you play Depths of Winter, none of those destruction effects trigger. They are just permanently removed from the game. They don't go to hand, nothing happens. They're just removed and replaced with light infantry. So you can wipe any board in the game with 0 fear. The single regiment's not going to damage you. Nothing is going to trigger. They all turn into 1/1 infantries. And that's just kind of fine. Like, you can just play Depth of Winter, turn their entire board to like 1/1 infantries, and then play a guard unit, and you're probably fine, because unless they're tokens, they're not going to have synergy with it. Or you can just combine this with 1 additional credit, play supply priorities, or whatever it's called, play Winter Warfare, 6 credits, 2-card combo, fully just wipe the board, including destruction effects. Absolutely insane. Now, obviously, it is a symmetrical effect, so you don't want to be playing this while you have units on board. And certain control decks, like Soviet France, have really been built around always having units on the board. However, always having units on the board is something Soviets struggle with. So if you ever lose the board, having just like an immediate wipe, or having an immediate wipe for like trading off all of your units, getting the most value out of your units as possible, triggering their destruction effects, whatever it is, and then Depths of Winter, just such a ludicrously powerful card. Like, this is just going to be a staple of every single Soviet control deck, and a lot of non-Soviet control decks, until the end of time. Such a powerful card. Then we have Production Order, which is a 1-cost US order. Choose to add a B-24D or a B-24J to your hand. I talked about this in my last video because it's getting changed next week. This was the original version. B-24D costs 3 less to deploy if you control a unit with 3 or more operation cost. 7 cost, 3 operation, 7/5, heavy armor 1. So US already has a unit. I forget what it's called off the top of my head. I think it's a Lancaster. But I could be entirely wrong about that. But it's just a 7-cost, 7/5, heavy armor 1 bomber. No text. So this is just the exact same thing, but sometimes it's cheaper. Then we have the B-24J, which is the exact same thing, except also it suppresses all enemy units when you play it, and also it has Blitz. So this card was absolutely insane. You would just play this as a 8-cost B-24J. Like, you would just pick B-24J 100% of the time. You would never not pick B-24J. This card's absolutely broken. Now, obviously, they have moved the Blitz from this version to this version. It's still going to be a very powerful card. It's still going to be a card played in every single US ramp and every single Brit US ramp deck until the end of time. Every single Soviet US ramp. However, it's going to be much more interesting which card you pick, because there's now going to be much more options. There's now going to be a thought process, which means maybe you don't play this card on turn 1 anymore, because you actually want to wait until you're in a situation where you can decide which of the effects you want, which is a good thing. Like, the fact that people will play this on turn 1 without a thought, without even knowing what their opponent is playing yet, the fact that people were playing this on turn 1, it shows that this was a poorly designed card. The fact that you have 2 options and people picked one of the 2 options like 99.99% of the time shows it's a bad card. So, now that it's been changed, I think it's going to be much more interesting. And all around, it's a very powerful card. I think it's fine. Like, it's been a while since Ramp got, like, a good heavy unit. Like, they've been kind of relying on TBF Avenger and B-17, and I think TBF Avenger got rotated, if I remember correctly. And then there's, like, a couple of US elites. So it's interesting for them to actually have a good, heavy bomber unit to play again other than B-17. But again, people who play control decks on ladder, ramp decks on ladder, are so greedy. Like, they're running 2 production orders and 2 B-17s and, like, every single elite that costs 7 or more. Don't play your deck like that. Like, you don't need to ramp into 20 big units, because that means that half the time your hand is just going to be full of big units. So, yeah. Then we get on to Vicious Salvo, one of my favorite cards of the expansion. Despite it being a very interesting... Like, it's a very interesting card. And it's a card that I practiced a lot. I ended up not bringing it to Worlds and Frontline. I thought the M24 was slightly better. The Swag was a lot better. But it's a very interesting card. So it's a 3-cost US order. Deal 3 damage to target unit. Suppress adjacent units. So it's another one of these positioning matters cards that's really, really interesting. And I really, really like this card. I really like its design. I really like how it makes both players think a lot. And there's even some weird situations where you can suppress your own units. Now, I have not tested this, but I'm pretty sure you can suppress your own unit to remove pin. I'm pretty sure you can suppress your own unit to remove supply shortage. I'm not positive about that, so don't quote me on that. Go into training mode right now and test it for yourself. But I'm pretty sure you can do that. So, you know, and the fact that this is deal 3 damage to target unit rather than enemy unit means there's situations where maybe you want to set up your own board to vicious salvo your own board to set up some stuff. It's just a really interesting card. I really love cards that make both players think a lot, so I love Vicious Salvo. And I think this is a card that could see play in Frontline. I think it's a card that could see play, obviously, in something like Unitless. Or just Control in any type of deck. It's just a very powerful card for a lot of different reasons. Then we have the Sissio Sasto 5D. Now, this is a card you have almost certainly seen since playing this. If you've played since the expansion, this is a card you've almost certainly been mad about if you've played since this expansion, because it is a 2-cost 1/2 card. And if you immediately look at that, you're just like, wow, this card sucks. It's going to need an absolutely ludicrously powerful effect to play a 2-cost 1/2 card. Well, its text is gains +1/+1 when an enemy unit is added, deployed, or destroyed. So you play this unit, and then you trade off one of their units. So you play it as a 2-cost 2/3 on an empty board. Well, now you play a unit to try to trade into it, but now it's a 3/4. So you play a second unit, but now it's a 4/5. And then you push up both units, and you go to trade with it, and you trade one of them in, but it dies, so now it's a 5/6. And then you trade out the other one, but now it dies too, because you thought it was going to be traded out, but you forgot that it gained +1/+1 from the first unit dying. So now it's like a 6/7. And your board's empty, so you have to play more units to deal with it, but when you play more units, it becomes a 7/8. So this card just, like, gets out of hand really, really quickly. And if you've ever played against an opponent who gets, like, 2 of these down by turn 4, you probably just immediately lost the game. Like, I've seen some of these guys get past 20-20. It's just absolutely insane. Also, the fact that it's added or deployed means that if you played something like Tokens, if you played a card like Skytrain, you're just going to be constantly growing the Sissio Sasto. Now, what's interesting about this card is it has no protection from orders. Like, this just dies to Sudden Strike. It doesn't matter if it's a 20-20, you can just kill it with Sudden Strike. Or, like, you can just suppress it and it becomes a 1/2. However, if you don't have suppress and you don't have, like, immediate removal like Sudden Strike, this card will just single-handedly win you the game. So it's really interesting. It encourages people to actually put more removal into their deck. There's no more of this nonsense, like 39-unit frontline that just exclusively plays, like, high-tempo good units, because Sissio Sasto kind of rolls over frontline. Or it makes frontline roll over. Like, it's just absolutely powerful, ludicrously powerful card. But it's a special, it's hard to find early, there's a lot of ways to deal with it, so I don't think it's ever going to become, like, a tier 1 broken, but it's just a really powerful card to mess with people on ladder, and potentially mess with certain lineups in tournament. Then we have Frozen Assets. This was another card that is getting changed in the upcoming balance patch. It's going from 3-cost to 4-cost. But as announced, it was a 3-cost Finnish order at a CC adjacent to a friendly unit. So you target a friendly unit with it, and it adds a CC next to it. So it can be in the front line or the support line, assuming you have space. And again, the CC is the 1/1 infantry that destroys any unit it damages. Now this CC has Blitz and Salvage, which means you can immediately use it to trade into something to remove it. It sort of solves the issue that the other CC cards had in that they didn't have Blitz, like the pin a unit summon a CC doesn't have Blitz, your opponent's just going to, like, play Bloody Sickle or whatever. This one, you summon the CC, you trade into it, and then also it has Salvage. It's a very, very powerful card, which is why it's being changed. And at 4-cost, I still think you're going to run maybe a couple of these in some of these Finnish control decks. Then you have Devil's Brigade, which I think was the devs in sort of like, oh no, what if Alpine gets out of hand card. It's a very, very powerful card. Frontline got a lot of powerful cards in this expansion. There's the M4A2 or M4A1, M2A4, whatever. The suppress tank. It got Vicious Salvo. It gets Devil's Brigade, a 3-cost, 3/3 infantry. Exile for Britain, I believe. Alpine and Blitz. So it's a US-British Alpine card. There is 0 US or British Alpine cards. So the fact that it says Alpine is literally meaningless. And then its deployment effect is deal 1 damage to an enemy. So not amazing. Like, just a 3-cost, 3/3, deal 1 damage to an enemy. Not amazing. If it is an Alpine unit, destroy it instead. So that's a very powerful effect. We'll talk about that more. And then it also has Blitz. So the fact that it has Blitz is already very powerful. We talked about how a 3-cost, 3/4 is sort of the standard line. A 3-cost, 3/3 that deals 1 damage when you play it is actually sort of better. So it's, in some ways, you can play it as a 3-cost, 4/3 Blitz, which is slightly worse than a 3/4 Blitz, I think, but there's situations where it's fine. But the fact that it's 1 damage means you can take out 2 units with it at once. And then also has this additional effect of dealing with Alpine units. And obviously, Alpine's not a big thing in the meta right now. Italy in general is not a big thing in the meta right now. But the fact that this is... You might immediately think of, like, well, this is just sort of like an anti-Alpine tech. This destroys 7th Alpine. You know the 4/7 Alpine guard that's super annoying because it heals, like, for 16? And it just crushes every, like, aggro and mid-range deck? Devil's Brigade one-shots it. This is not necessarily just a counter to Alpine. This is a counter to Italy ally control, and a very, very powerful counter is that. Like, if you know your opponent might be running Devil's Brigade, do you want to risk spending your entire turn playing down a 7th Alpine that it gets immediately removed without healing you? Like, this is a very interesting card. It's a very powerful card, and it's a card that you could just run in frontline as just a tech card, because even if your opponent has 0 Alpine cards, this is still a good card. But again, the problem is, frontline lost almost no units to rotation and got, like, 10 cards that they want to put in their deck. So I don't think it's as good as the other options, but, like, there's going to be certainly metas where Devil's Brigade will be considered, and probably Devil's Brigade will be played, and I'm sure there will be a tournament where someone gets absolutely blown out by having their 7th Alpines destroyed by Devil's Brigades. Then we get to Push. Now, I actually already talked about Push in my first video, but that was Push as a standard. They did, before releasing it, they did change it to be a special. And if you've played the game since the expansion dropped, or if you watched Worlds, you saw Push is an absolutely stupid card. Push combo is a tier 1. Like, the British-Soviet Push is tier 1. Soviet-Britain Push is probably also tier 1. Push is just an incredibly powerful card, and I would not be that surprised if we see double Push lineups in tournaments. And yeah, the Push needs to be nerfed, to be completely honest. This card is just absolutely insane. I think the intention of this card was to give self-damage something. Self-damage does not want to run this card. Like, so nerfing this card isn't even like, oh, but you're nerfing it to self-damage as well. Self-damage is good without this card, and self-damage would not want to run this card anyways. So yeah, it's just a weird card that needs to be nerfed. I think it was just a completely failed idea. And by nerf, I mean just reworked. Like, I know this, like, combo players are, like, happy that there's, like, this tier 1 combo deck for the first time in a long time. But Push is too strong. I think a lot of people can agree with that. And it's just a bit of a silly combo. Now, there's an argument that you could just, like, nerf all of the British stall cards, because those are kind of the key things in the game. But then there's also Great Patriotic War that lets you just kill your opponent in 1 turn from any health, basically. So yeah, I want to see Push reworked. It's a dumb card. And I say that as the person who brought, like, 1 Worlds with Push OTK. Then we have the T-34-85 1944. This was another card that I already talked about, but then they buffed before releasing. I think it was a 6/6. Now it's a 7/7. So, you know, just giving it +1/+1, it makes it a good card. Again, I think the primary way you are going to be seeing this card is by things like Euro Factories, like Red Banner, like Upgrade. So I don't think anyone's really going to be playing this card on its own. Again, Blitz and Guard makes it a little bit hard to work. If you control 3 or more units, makes it a little bit hard to work. But, you know, if you're generating this for free off of a T-35 or T-34 that would otherwise die, you know, you're just going to take that. So, it's an interesting card. Then we have White Death. I forget if I revealed this card or talked about this card or not already, but this is another card that they changed. It is now suppress all enemy units, add a CC to your support line with Blitz. So this is another way to get CC with Blitz. However, it's in your support line, so it can only trade out with stuff in the front line. However, the primary reason you're going to be playing this card is 4 cost, suppress all enemy units. This is a ludicrously powerful effect. Again, which is why it's mind-boggling that the B-24J was suppress all enemy units and also get a Blitz 7.5 bomber with heavy armor. So the change to this card was it was formerly suppress all enemies, which meant you could suppress the enemy HQ, which meant you could remove things such as feigned retreat, which is an interesting mechanic if there was more things like feigned retreat, because feigned retreat is the only friendly HQ modifier you can give yourself. All of the other ones are ones you would put on them, because it would remove your own road to Berlin, for example. However, it was also originally planned to reset their health to 20. In the same way it resets unit stats to their base stats, it would reset health to the starting health of 20, assuming they are over. Now, that is a ludicrously powerful effect, and it's a very good thing that that was never seen, that never saw the light of day. This is a very good change. It's a very powerful card. You're going to run this in any Finnish control deck, probably as a 2-of. It is a very powerful card. Then we have the 3rd Canadian Division. It is a 4-cost, 4/5 guard for Britain Elite. It has salvage. With the text, your salvage units cost 2 less to deploy. Now, all salvage units are capped at 3 cost, so this makes them 1 cost or 0 cost. And that's pretty good. 4 cost, 4/5 guard. Pretty good. Positive effect. Pretty good. Yeah, I think this is just going to be a card that you run in Brit Control. You run it in Brit Ramp if you find space, but it's also a card you could easily cut from Brit Control or Brit Ramp. Like, you're going to run this in Finnish. Like, if you're doing a salvage deck, you're obviously going to run this in any sort of Brit Finland salvage deck. But the fact that it's an elite, and it doesn't have any immediate effect when you play it, makes it... You're not going to build your deck around this. You can't build your deck around this. But it's just sort of like a card that you're going to throw in your deck because it's good. It's no first rifles. It's not that good. But, you know, it's just a card that you're going to put in your deck if you can find the space for it. Then we have Breaking Point, a 2-cost Finnish order. Destroy a suppressed or pinned unit. Now, if you compare this to a card like Surprise Attack, which is 1 cost to destroy a pin a unit, or if it's already pinned, to destroy it, you're spending 2 extra credit, or you're spending 1 extra credit with the bonus of you can destroy it if it's suppressed. However, if it's suppressed, you probably don't want, well, not don't want to destroy it, but like it's less important to destroy it if it's already been suppressed. So yeah, this is just a weird card. I don't think anyone's ever going to run it. This is a bit of a pack filler card. Then we have Les Terribles, which is just a hilarious name for a card. It's literally just the Terribles. Because it's a bit of a terrible card. Now, it's not actually that bad. It's a 2-cost, 3/4 infantry, which is pretty good. However, it has 3 operation cost, which is pretty bad. However, it has the text, when you deploy another unit with operation cost 3 or more, draw a card. So this was supposed to be US's big theme for this expansion, is units with 3 or more operation cost. We see the B-24D or B-24B or whatever it is. The other option off of the production orders, which was if you have a 3 operation cost unit on the board, reduce this cost, and it has 3 operation cost. So if you have a Les Terribles on the board, you can play the B-24D or whatever it was for 3 cost less, and then it's going to draw you a card off Les Terribles. However, that requires, you know, you filling up your board slots with cards that don't have guard, that don't heal, and that have way too much operation cost to trade out with units. Now, there is the one payoff of Victory March. You get all these 3 operation cost units on the board, and then you heal a lot back to full health, and then suddenly they're all 0 operation cost and can pop off. However, that never happens ever. So it's very difficult to make this card work. Maybe in the future, there's a couple combos, like the first Airborne, the 1 cost, 1/1 for operation cost, mobilize British card, is combos with this, but I just don't think there's enough cheap, good, playable cards with 3 or more operation cost to make Les Terribles worth it. And there's just better, like, why wouldn't you just play Convoy, right? Then we have Jet Prototype, which again is a card that's been changed, and oh boy, was Jet Prototype powerful. And still is powerful. So Jet Prototype, 6 cost, 0 operation cost, German fighter, 1/4 with Blitz. Deployment, remove the top 6 cards of your deck, get +1 attack for each one with even cost. So this is the first time cards got any type of card with any even or odd synergy, which is a synergy that I really like, or a mechanic that I really like, I should say. Now, that being said, Jet Prototype was a far too powerful card, because it turns out it's really easy to make an entirely even cost deck. That's not as much of a deck building restriction as a lot of people thought it was going to be. And if your deck is entirely even, this is just a 6-cost, 7/4/0 operation cost plane. And as it turns out, that's pretty good if you play it in a deck that is full of just entirely aggressive and well-statted mid-range cards. Which is why it's not that big of a surprise that this originally started as a US ally, where you run War Machines, you run 35Ts, you run 5th Rangers, you run Duress. But then it quickly moved to Soviet ally because you run War Productions, you run 554ths, you run Katyushas, and you just try to make the entire thing more aggressive. Flood the front line, Jet Prototype, ludicrously powerful card. I'm glad it's being nerfed. And I was the only one who didn't bring it to Worlds. I did not think this card was going to be that good. I thought this card was going to be playable. I thought there was a lot of potential with this card. I did not think it was going to be like the tier 1 deck of the meta. I saw a lot more potential with the War Production Panzer Grenadier combo, which is, I was the only one who brought that. And then we ended up seeing the meta being a combination of those two things with, you take the War Production and the Panzer Grenadier combo, and then you combine it with the Jet Prototype, and you make the tier 1 deck. So yeah, Jet Prototype, what else to say about it? Then you have the card that you probably forgot existed, the SDF. It's a 2-cost, 1/4 British infantry. Your other units have +1 attack for each of your guard units. I don't think there's a lot else to say about this card. It's just really, really bad and really, really janky, and fits into the long list of really, really bad, really, really janky ground guard infantry vaguely themed bad British cards. Moving on very quickly, we get Line of Engagement, which is another card that's being nerfed. In the upcoming balance patch. It was announced and released as a 2-cost Soviet order. Add a light infantry to your hand, support line, and front line if possible. So as it turns out, 2-cost get 3 light infantry is pretty good. 2-cost get 3 light infantry, 2 of which start on the board, is even better. Get 2-cost get 3 light infantry, 2 of which start on the board, 1 of which is in the front line, is absolutely insane, especially when you combine it with things like the Baronovici, where they come out as a 2/2 and a 3/3. So yeah, Line of Engagement, absolutely busted card, pushed tokens, more than Baronovici, I would argue. I think this is has a much more of an impact on the playability of tokens than Baronovici does, because Baronovici is just like an additional way to gain stats at the cost of tempo. Line of Engagement is a way to gain tempo and stats, and actually challenge the front line and challenge the board in general against decks like Aggro, against decks like Frontline. So yeah, incredibly powerful card. And it's going to continue to be incredibly powerful even after the nerf. Then we have Multi-Tactic, a 7-cost Finnish order, destroy target unit and salvage it. I think this is comparable to the Co-Belligerents, the 7-cost British order, remove target unit and shuffle it into your deck. Since Multi-Tactic is primarily going to be played in British control, I believe. 6-cost destroy target unit, is sort of the cost, like 6 is the destroy target unit cost. So you're paying 1 extra credit and salvaging it. Salvaging is just not that good. There's very few units. Like, there's obviously some units that this is going to be really powerful. Like, if your opponent plays Leopold, you just play Multi-Tactic on it, you remove the 6/4 artillery, and then you get a little Leopold in your hand to play until the end of time that your opponent has to worry about. But there's also just a lot of matchups where your opponent's not going to have any unit that's, like, worth you salvaging. So, like, I think this is a fine as, like, a 1-of in a Finnish control deck, but I think you're going to be very hard-pressed to find it running 2. This is no partisans, it's low on tempo, high on value, and value has not been the name of the game for a very, very long time. That being said, obviously there's a lot of potential in this card if we ever, like, get into a slower meta, or if you're bringing it to a tournament specifically to counter slower decks. Then we have the third Meitsuru SNLF. It is a 3-cost 2/3 Japanese Alpine unit. When you add or deploy an Alpine unit to deal 1 damage to a random enemy, pin it if it is a unit. Now this card, Japan has next to no other Alpine cards. Obviously this effect is absolutely insane. If this was a German card, it would be broken. But it's a Japanese card, and it's not that good. Obviously the effect is really powerful, but you're not going to be running pin synergy in your Japan-Italy Alpine. Or your Japan-German Alpine if you want to do that instead. You're just simply not going to be running pin synergy. So it's just a good effect that has 0 synergy with your deck, and sometimes it just goes face. So yeah, it's if Japan Alpine ever could exist, you would run this card in it, but Japan Alpine is just so far from existing. This is a bit of like a nothing card. And the Japan, you're not going to do German Japan Alpine, you're not going to do Japan Italy Alpine, you're not going to do Japan German Alpine. It's just simply not going to happen at the moment. And that brings us to the end of this. We have a few other cards to go through, 17 other cards to go through, starting with Jaeger. Oh, whoops, let me switch. Starting with Jaeger Battalion, which is a very powerful card. I got very close to bringing this to Worlds, but I was like, well, I want to run it in a British deck, and I'm just instead going to run Push. Jaeger Battalion is a very, very powerful card. It's a 4-cost 3/4 Ambush Guard, Finnish card. So just 4-cost 3/4 Ambush Guard is already, like, pretty good stats. Like, 3 attack Ambush is pretty good. 4-cost 3/4 Guard, not bad. Deployment, add a CC to your support line. And it is a CC to your support line that is being guarded by an Ambush Guard. And your opponent's already going to throw their lowest attack thing to trigger the ambush, if possible, if they can't remove it outright. And if they can remove it outright, it's because they are pushing up their biggest thing to trade into it. So it's just it's a card that just works out really, really well with just the way stats work in the game right now. The way what decks have access to pings, what decks have access to removal. I think this deck just fits, or this card fits really, really well into the meta right now, and I would run this as a 3 of in any Finnish ally control deck at the moment. It's just a very, very good card, without being to the point of being oppressive, because it is a 3/4, the summons a 1/1. It's not like a C4 Highlanders. Like, if you can remove it with removal, you just remove it with removal. Sometimes you just trade into it with a 5th Rangers or a Sherman and get rid of it. So yeah, it's a very powerful card without being oppressive. Then we have another Finnish card. It is a Finnish fighter, 2-cost, 2 operation cost, 2/3 Fiat. This has +3 attack against units with higher attack. So this is a bad card. I think it kind of goes without saying. Now, the 2-cost, 2/3 fighters with 2 operation cost exist and have seen play. Buffalo, the British 2-cost, 2/3 fighter, saw a limited play, which is gains +1/+1 whenever it survives combat, but that's just because it's a British plane that you can buff. The Finnish Fiat, 2-cost, 2/3 operation, or 2-cost, 2/3, 2 operation cost Italian fighter saw play because it healed you, and you would run it as a controlled card. You would run it to counter bombers. This is really bad. So you're just like, why would you pay a 2-cost, 2/3 fighter with 2 operation cost with the intention of trading? Like, what are you trading into this? And like, even if your opponent does play, like, you know, like a 5/5, and you're like, oh, I'm going to trade my Fiat into the 5/5, they're not going to play the 5/5 until they have removed your Fiat. Like, they're not going to just give you a trade into a 5/5 with this. And otherwise, it's just a really bad unit. Yeah, it's just a bad card. Then we have another Italian card. This is one of the most interesting cards in the game right now. It's called Through the Ice. Deal 2 damage to a unit and each other unit with the same name. So there's situations where, like, you know, if your opponent plays turn 1 cavalry, turn 1, 2 cavalry, and then you play Through the Ice, 2-cost, destroy all of them. Now, that's kind of the same as a Tora Tora. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't just play Tora Tora. Also, if you had your own cavalry, it would deal damage to your own cavalry, so that's a bit weird. And the number 1 use of this card is against tokens, since all of their tokens are light infantry with the same name. So this is 2-cost, deal 2 damage to all tokens. But is that, like, you would have to be in a solid tokens meta for that to be even worth considering over just, you know, like any other piece of removal. Because deal 2 damage is not a lot. Like, if this cost 3 and dealt 3 damage to each unit with the same name, maybe. Because then that actually kills them if they've been buffed by frontal assault. But as it stands, Through the Ice is just a laughably terrible card with a very interesting effect, and I think it's a little bit fitting that its really only playable situation beyond just, like, highly unlikely scenarios is against the Soviets. Then we have the German 7-cost order Mountain Offensive. Add a random 1, 2, and 3-cost units with Alpine to your support line, and these units can be across any nation, so this can give you access to those Soviet and those Japanese and those Italian Alpine cards. This is just a very powerful card. It's a board refill in a single card. They do, the 2-cost will get +1/+1, the 3-cost will get +2/+2. And yeah, this is just a very, very high value card, and I've been complaining about high value cards for a while now, just saying that they're kind of not worth it. This card is worth it in Alpine, because in Alpine, you're just kind of trying to dump your hand as quickly as possible, and if your opponent has a well-timed Monsoon Rot supply shortage, suddenly it's difficult to rebuild the board. You don't have a ton of card draw in Alpine, and it takes a lot of cards to build a full board of Alpine. So just having, like, if your board gets entirely wiped, you play Mountain Offensive, and you just have 3 Alpine units on the board in a single card. And from there, you can start rebuilding later into the game. So I think it's a really interesting card. It also costs 7, so you don't have to worry about, you know, them cheesing this out super early to, like, high roll with Alpine. I think it's interesting for Alpine to have sort of this more expensive stay in the game late type of card, rather than additional 1-cost Alpine units to get, like, the best potential high roll. And again, we've seen no Alpine in the meta right now because it's just far too slow. And I don't think that's really going to change anytime soon. But if it did change, I think you would be seeing 2 copies of Mountain Offensive in the deck as a bit of just like a finisher. Then you have Distant Front, a 1-cost Japanese order. Remove target unit with 3 or less attack from the battlefield. Return it at the start of your next turn. So this is a weird combination of effects, all of which we have seen in Japan before. So remove a unit from the battlefield, return it at the start of your next turn. They have Isolation, which I forget if it's been rotated or not, but it was the 2-cost remove target unit, period, from the battlefield, return it at the start of your next turn. And I think the intention was to, like, sort of remove guards, go face, guard comes back. However, it has seen play with a strategy that I am very, very fond of. Is one that I think I said in a video a long time ago, in my elite card tier list video, that you can play it on your own stuff, like Kawanishi. Remove your Kawanishi from the game, so your opponent can't remove it, and then it comes back, and you start your turn with 12 credits and Kawanishi on board. So Distant Front is just a cheaper way to accomplish that exact same thing if you're using it exclusively with Kawanishi. However, you're probably willing to spend 1 additional credit on that combo with the fact to get the effect of being able to play Isolation on your opponent's units without the attack limit. Now, would you rather play this than just Honorable Death if you are trying to get through a guard? Probably not. You'd probably just rather play Honorable Death, which is a 1-cost remove or destroy target unit with 3 attack or less from the battlefield, and they draw a card. I think you would rather give them a card draw and remove the unit permanently than remove it temporarily. So yeah, it's just a really weird card that I don't think fits into anything. It's just bizarre. But again, it could see potential play in the future as a replacement for Isolation in a very specific type of deck. Then we have another Japanese 1-cost order. Out of the Mist, deal 1 damage to target unit. If it is destroyed this turn, salvage it. So this is what I was talking about with the scrap metal. Like if you go second, your opponent plays turn 1 out of the Mist. Or sorry, your opponent plays turn 1 cavalry regiment, and you do turn 1 out of the Mist, destroy their cavalry regiment, scrap metal, discard the cavalry regiment, draw a card, you gain 4 credits, and you slam a turn 1 key, and you win the game. You know, that could happen. Otherwise, out of the Mist, like, it requires them to have a 1-health unit. Interestingly, though, and this is something that I discovered through gameplay, not by reading the card as it is described, if it is destroyed this turn, salvage it. So you don't actually have to kill the unit with Out of the Mist. You can play Out of the Mist first and then destroy it, which is interesting. There's not like a ton of situations where this matters, but there could be situations where this does matter. So for example, like if you want to like trade off a unit to draw a card first, see what you draw into Out of the Mist. Well, I guess again that's actually not playing Out of the Mist first. So yeah, I don't know what situations you would want to play Out of the Mist first, but you can play Out of the Mist first. That is an interesting thing. So for example, like if you're playing To the Last Man, you can do like Out of the Mist on like an 8-health unit, and then To the Last Man, and you'll still salvage it. Just like if you can't bring the unit to 1 health, if just the math doesn't work up. But yeah, it's a bit of a weird card. Then we have a 1-cost Japanese unit, a 2/1 infantry with blitz and salvage, however, has 1 operation cost. This is another one of those Japanese cheap ways to get salvage. And again, it's just really weird to me that Japan has 0 salvage payoff. All of the salvage payoff cards are in Finland. So again, Mixed Regiment getting buffed. It's weird to me that Mixed Regiment gets buffed because Japan has no payoffs for salvage cards. Mixed Regiment, it's a little harder to use. But on the other hand, it's a unit. so it can do stuff on its own. However, you know, if you play mixed regiment, you push it to the front line and your opponent trades into it on their turn, you do not salvage. Salvage is only on your turn. So yeah, it's harder to use. I think it's worse than Out of the Mist. Then we have Saruga Regiment, which if you watch World Championships, you saw an unfortunate amount of Saruga Regiment. It's a 4-cost Japanese unit. 2/4 destruction, deal damage equal to its attack to the enemy HQ. So essentially the point of this card is you play this card and then you play a whole bunch of buffs that buff its attack, and then you have the unit die, and all of that buff goes straight to the enemy HQ. However, there's not really a way to do that effectively. We saw Leo build a Saruga OTK deck and play it at Worlds. I think he went like 0-8 with it or something. He lost a lot of games, maybe 0-7. He lost every single game he played on Saruga Regiment. Now, there's some arguments that he could have changed the way he built his deck to make it better. I don't think it was a particularly refined list. I also think there was ways he could have played his deck better. I don't think he had a ton of experience on the deck or on combo decks more generally. And I don't think he played to his outs nearly as much as he could have. So I think the deck is much better than it seemed performance-wise from Worlds. However, it's just not a good deck. However, it has potential. Like, you know, we might see this card show back up if 1939 ever releases like a mass buff card for Japan or Japan Soviet. That they sort of underestimate its potential with Saruga Regiment. Or if there's a way to trigger Saruga's Regiment's destruction effect multiple times from hand, like if they ever just release like a 1-cost trigger a target unit's destruction effect, maybe it will be easier to like do it twice, essentially, like get its attack up to 10 and then trigger its destruction effect twice. Because getting its attack up to 20 is very, very difficult. Then we have another notorious card from Worlds, the A6M221-0, which is a 6-cost 4/3 Japanese fighter elite with the target, or with the passive effect, the first card played by the enemy unit each turn costs double. So this is a very powerful effect. However, it is a effect that is very difficult to evaluate. So for example, if you play this on turn 6 and your opponent really wanted to play that turn 7 Kyber Bomb, they can't because it now costs 14. However, if you play this on turn 6 and you really wanted to stop your opponent playing, I don't know, like Corson, or you play this on turn 6 or turn 7 and you're trying to stop your opponent from playing Naval Brigade, because their Naval Brigade now costs 12. They can play a 2-cost Bloody Sickle to get rid of this effect, and then they will play their Naval Brigade for 6 and destroy this, or destroy whatever you wanted to not have be destroyed. So there's ways to play around it, but it's a really interesting card because you want to save, if you know your opponent's playing this, or you think your opponent might be playing this, you want to save your cheap cost cards, because if your entire hand costs 7 or more, and you aren't playing ramp, and they play 0, you are literally just locked out of the game. You cannot play cards. 0 is a very, very high potential value card, or high potential impact card. However, there's also, like, you know, if your opponent is playing Red Dawns, they can just kill 0 for 2 credits. So yeah, there's a reason it has not seen a ton of play, and that reason is it's a bit too squishy, and it's a bit too difficult to predict the how good this card is, and that also just assumes that they don't have units on board that can trade this out before needing to play cards in hand. But I think this effect is very powerful. If you can get 2 of these on the board, you can potentially just hard lock your opponent out much quicker. If you can get 3 of these on the board, you just like win the game. So yeah, there's some crazy potential with this card, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see this in the future, but currently it just really realistically does not fit into the meta whatsoever. Then we have T-35, a 2-cost Soviet tank, 2/3, deals 1 damage to the HQ, to each HQ at the start of your turn. So you can run this in like a hyper aggro deck because it's 2-cost 2/3 tank that deals damage to the enemy HQ. It's sort of like a signal regiment kind of deal. You can play this in self-damage as a 2-cost 2/3 that deals 1 damage to yourself every turn to trigger your, like, 456, your 272nd, or not 272nd, 260 your 34th Guards, etc. However, it doesn't have Blitz. It's at the start of your turn, so it doesn't have any immediate effect when you play it. It's just a 2-cost 2/3 tank, which is not that good. I don't think this card is that good, but like it can fit into like budget self-damage decks or budget Soviet aggro decks. And like maybe in the future it could see play most likely in a Soviet aggro deck. Just if you're flooding the board so much, maybe this is fine. Then you have Snowstorm. I do not like this card, but hey, it's better than Scorch. So it's a 1-cost Soviet order. All units have operation cost 4 until the start of your next turn. And this is just what Scorched Earth should have been. Like they should have just changed Scorched Earth to be this effect. But hey, we have this again, and I feel bad for anyone who plays Classic mode because Soviets now have access to Snowstorm and to Scorched Earth. Dear Lord. Again, I hate this type of stall card. Like, Operation Cost is one of the most interesting things in cards. I think this is just a far too powerful effect for its credit cost. Now, I really appreciate that this is a symmetrical effect, and it is a temporary effect. However, realistically, you could think of this as a 1-cost pin all enemy units. And also, the way it's worded is all units have Operation Cost 4 until the start of your next turn. This implies that if you play a new unit with Blitz, it will also have 4 operation cost. I'm not sure if that is how it works or not. I've not played this card much myself. I know there have been cards in the past with things that sound like it will be a passive effect throughout the entire next turn, and then it isn't. It only affects units currently on the board. And then there's things like Mud, where it's the other way around, where it's a passive effect that does affect all units, including the units you play. So, it's a very powerful stall effect card. I mean, you could play this in Brit-Soviet push. I don't think you need to, but you could. It's a very powerful card. You absolutely play this in Soviet-Brit push because it's a Soviet card that's really, really powerful stall, and you can't run as many British stall cards. Yeah, it's just a very powerful effect. It's going to be seen in Tier 1 combo decks. It's going to be seen in all sorts of Tier 1 combo decks until the end of time. Or stall decks, control decks, OTK decks, whatever. It's just such a powerful effect. 1 cost to just essentially buy yourself a turn. Then we have Detached Battalion. This is the card that got buffed in the upcoming patch by giving it smokescreens. A 4-cost Finnish, 2/3 infantry, salvage, deployment, deal target unit, destroy target unit with 2 cost or less. So it's a little bit like the Flam Panzer effect, but it salvages it as well. And yeah, it's just like, if you're playing a salvage deck, you're going to run this card. This is one of the best cards that salvage things, because the best cards to salvage are things that cost 2 or less. In terms of like because they're typically going to have Blitz, so they have synergy with the guy that makes them 4/4s. But that being said, again, there's all these cards that would be really good if salvage did anything, but salvage just doesn't do anything, so they're kind of just overcosted mid cards. And that's really what Detached Battalion is. With Smokescreen, it gets a lot better because you can keep it around and maybe salvage a second thing. But again, there's just so little payoffs to salvaging things. Then you have the 104th Infantry Regiment. It is a 4-cost, 1 operation cost, 6/6 Smokescreen Infantry for US. Moving on, we have Grim Day, a 1-cost US order. Until your next turn, it costs 2 + 2 credits for the enemy to target or attack your units. And this is target with orders, this is target with deployment effects, and this is attack with units on board. This is a very powerful effect. And this is, again, one of those cards where it's like, if Frontline just, like, had a little bit more card draw, or, like, a little less cards that you absolutely want to run in the deck, I could see you playing a Grim Day or 2 in Frontline as just sort of, like, you flood the board, you play Grim Day, and you set up a Blitzkrieg, because your opponent can't do anything. The one downside is it does not do anything to AoE effects that don't target anything specifically, such as Monsoon Rot or Supply Shortage. However, if you're against anything else, obviously there's other, like, ISU, Winter Warfare, Depth of Winter, etc. Like, Britain is not the only nation that has AoEs, although it certainly feels like that sometimes. But Grim Day, against any type of deck that's trying to trade out, any type of deck that's trying to play a targeted removal, Grim Day is incredibly powerful, and it costs 1, which means it's a bit like Duress, where it's just like, costs 1, you just throw it out there. If you can have the card draw to make up for this, Grim Day's insane. You can also use this in, like, sort of like an L640, maybe US-Japan, Japan-US, like, hyper aggro deck, and you just throw this out really early to protect your units. Like, can you imagine if this card existed in, something like the Hummer OTK, not OTK, the Hummer aggro, like the Combined Arms deck, like, you just, like, play Grim Day, and suddenly you can't play Flam Pans, or you can't play Sudden Strike because it's turn 3, and it costs 4 credits to target it with Sudden Strike, and you just lose the game. Yeah, the Grim Day is a very powerful effect that has seen 0 play so far, but I think it will see play at some point, because, again, it is an incredibly powerful effect. It's similar to Snowstorm in terms of... what's different is it's on a stall card. Like, it's a win more card, whereas Snowstorm is just a stall card. But it's a win more card that is powerful enough that I think it can see play, because you don't even necessarily need to be winning. Like, if you use Grim Day to protect, like, a single key unit that then you pop off with the next turn, it's going to be good. So yeah, Grim Day, really interesting card, really powerful card. I think it's going to see play. Then we have the T26FL. It's a 1-cost, 1/3 Finnish tank. And this saw a ton of play right when the expansion dropped in Japan, Finland Aggro, in German, Finland Heinz, because it has the text has +2 attack against units with higher attack, and it has 1 attack. So most units have higher attack. So if this kills 2 3s, it's a 3/3 against a 2/3, it's a 3/3 against a 3/3, it's a 3/3 against a 4/3, it's a 3/3 against like a 2/7, whatever. It's just a really powerful card. Turns out 1/3 units, 1/3 tanks are pretty good units. Now it doesn't have Blitz, and it does not have additional attack against other 1/3 units, which are far more common. Like, it still has 1 attack against Greyhound. It still has +1 attack against Red Devils. So that's why it kind of fell off. But there's always the possibility that Finnish ally in aggro decks could come back. And if it does come back, this card will be very, very important in those decks, because it's just a 1/3 unit that you can throw out. Then we have the Welsh Regiment. It is a 3-cost, 3/4 Fury Infantry in Britain. And last but not least, we have Take Liberty, which is a very, very, very powerful card. It's a very, 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 very popular card. I brought, at one point, while I was testing decks for Worlds, I was looking at Soviet Japan aggro, and US Japan aggro, and German Japan aggro. I was considering bringing 12 copies of Take Liberty to Worlds at one point. And then I didn't. I did bring 3 copies of it in my Japan-German deck. But it's just such a powerful card. And this is going to be a core card of the meta until the end of time. And by end of time, I mean until it is rotated or nerfed into the dirt. Both of which I could honestly believe happening over the course of the next 2 years. Because Take Liberty is each player shuffles their hand into their deck and then draws 4 cards. Now, if your opponent has 9 cards in their hand, you are essentially denying them 5 cards. Like, you are discarding them 5 cards. And if you have 0 cards in hand, you are playing 4 cost to draw 4. And if your opponent has 9 cards and you have 0 cards, it is 4 cost, draw 4, discard 5 cards from the opponent, which is really, really good. Now, obviously, those are all, like, in best case scenarios. Now, you could have 3 Take Liberties in your hand, and your opponent has 0 cards in hand, which means if you play Take Liberty, it is 4 cost, draw 2 cards, draw your opponent 4 cards, which is really, really, really bad. So it's the power of Take Liberty is also just the effect that this unlocks Japan ally in every single nation. Like, every single aggro deck in other nations struggled from the fact that there was no good aggressive card draw. Like, Enigma just was not consistent enough. This is far more consistent than Enigma, because you can run 3 of them, and it always draws you 4 cards no matter what. So this just unlocks so many aggressive deck building options in the future. And on top of that, it's just really good in Japan. Plus, it is a card draw that is very good against control. Well, it still has a drawback of creating interesting situations of, like, when do you play it in an aggro mirror. So yeah, it's a very powerful effect. Ludicrously, ludicrously powerful effect. But it's not necessarily just broken. I still could see this being nerfed because it is a frustrated effect. But it's sort of self-balancing in the fact that the more of them you run in your deck, if you draw them both at the same time, you can't play them both at the same time. We've seen that similar effect with cards like Edge of the Empire, another very powerful Japan draw card that has seen no play. So yeah, a very, very interesting effect in Take Liberty. And that brings us to the end of the Winter War cards so far. And that is it. So those are my thoughts on the cards. Now, obviously, all of those cards currently exist in the game. And a lot of those cards have had impacts on the metas. There's a balance patch coming out next week, and they have said that there will be another bigger balance patch in March that could change a lot of these cards that we've already seen. But those are a lot of potential options of decks. I hope I have inspired you to build a deck if you have some of these cards in your collection and have no idea what to do with them. And you can certainly expect me to be building a lot of things with these decks, as most notably hunting the elusive white whale that is a scrap metal deck, because scrap metal is insane. You can expect to see a bunch of hyper aggro Japan allies with Take Liberties. You can expect to see trying to make Jet prototype work after the nerf comes in, see how powerful it still is, see if I can make it good. You can expect to see a lot of different things. And again, as I said in my last video, if you made it this far, thank you very much for getting through this video. I know it's almost 2 hours now. I wanted to do all of them just in one video, rather than spacing them out, because all of the cards have been revealed so far. No need to spam your inbox. And you can expect to see at some point a review of the rotation cards, the cards that were rotated at the start of this expansion in December. But other than that, feel free to give me ideas of things you want to see moving forward. And yeah, subscribe if you haven't already, share this video with your friends, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.